Today is November 15th, 2023. We are interviewing Esther Saxon. My name is Esther Finder. Ms. Saxon is in Washington, D.C. in the United States. I am in Henderson, Nevada, and the language will be English. Thank you for speaking with us today. What is your name, and can you please spell it?
My current name is Esther Saxon. Saxon is S-A-X-O-N, and Esther is E-S-T-E-R.
What was your name at birth?
I believe that my name at birth was Halas Hedy. Hedy, the first name, H-E-D-Y, and the surname would have been H-A-L-A-S-Z.
Where were you born?
I was born in Budapest, Hungary.
And when were you born?
It was the year of 1944. It was the 2nd day of May.
And forgive me for asking, but how old are you today?
That makes me 79. I don't like the expression, how old? I'm 79 years young.
Even better. How long had your family lived in Hungary? Had they been there many generations?
Well, I've been doing a lot of family search, family tree work, and yes, they have been there for generations.
What do you know of your hometown? Was it a big city? Was it industrial? Was it commercial?
My mother got married and lived in Budapest, which is the capital of Hungary. It was big, fashionable, was the center of life, even for Europe, for sort of rivaling Paris. Yeah.
What was your father's name?
My father's name was Halas Sándor. Sándor is the Hungarian equivalent of Alexander.
And what did he do for a living?
He had an import-export company, a sort of shipping company. And I know very little about him, but to the best, I found the business card, and it says import-export company with his name, and I understand that he ran the company.
What was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Roth, R-O-T-H, Olga, O-L-G-A.
And what work did she do?
She was a very independent lady doing fashion design, and she had sales people who were selling her fashion drawings.
What do you know about your parents' lives before the war?
Well, I know that my mother was introduced to lots of eligible matches, and she didn't like any of them. And she accidentally met my father, and the two of them fell in love. And that was not very welcome by my mother's family, who was very religious, and was not very welcome by my father's family, who was very liberated, and he was supposed to be a good catch, so they were expecting him not to marry a poor girl, but a wealthy, sophisticated woman. But anyhow, that's what happened. They fell in love. And My mother's parents told him that the only way he can marry my mother is if he becomes religious, and from there'll be another story. They got married.
You want to share that?
Sorry, they got married in May 1943.
How old were you when the Nazis came to your area?
I believe that the Nazis were already there, but the Hungarian government was repelling them somewhat, keeping them at bay. So in May, some Jews were already put in ghettos, but my mother and father were still free to move. But I think by June, my father was in a forced labor camp, and so on. So things started getting stricter and stricter. My parents' apartment became a ghetto, so all of a sudden she had to share her apartment with other families, and sort of life became very risky day after day. Just to backtrack for a moment, before my birth, they already prepaid the hospital for my birth. But the night before I was born, the gynecologist shot himself and shot his wife first, and then shot himself in the head because he was told that he will not be able to practice medicine as a Jew anymore. So there was a lot of drama even before I was born.
So who attended your mother at your birth?
There were two midwives. They sort of attended, the hospital was bombed at the time when my mother was in labor. And they sort of attended, they said to her that she has to hurry. So they took forceps and pulled me out and then left her alone. And they went down to the bomb shelter, left my mother just there. And then when my mother managed to gather herself, she grabbed me and she walked down the dark spiral staircase herself to the bomb shelter. But the next day or two, they attended to her regularly until we left.
Is there anything more you wanted to add to the story of your birth?
Well, I wasn't there. I mean, I was there, but I not consciously. I think that my mother had to walk home from the hospital because Jews could not have transport. So it was a bit of a drama, but obviously we survived, and I don't really know much detail. It's always like when I asked my mother about things, she was very reluctant telling me things. And of course, all my stories are second-hand stories, not first-hand stories. Somebody would tell me something. So, no, I don't know. Oh, yes, that the hospital later was bombed. My mother took me later, when I was big enough to understand, she took me and showed me the hospital, and it was just all rubble. It wasn't, there wasn't a building there. So we got out of there just in time. Maybe that's it.
You mentioned your father. What was happening with him?
He was taken to forced labor camp. I have written down the name, but anyhow, and he was regularly writing postcards to my mother from there. It was all supervised and stamped that this went through censorship. And during the time when he was in Hungary, in the camp, that labor camp, it was not too bad. He would write saying, we have enough to eat and you don't have to worry. And can you send me my good pair of shoes? Because I have worn my old pair of shoes, have holes in them and so on. So he was communicating and he was very happy to hear about me and that I'm growing and sending messages that I should be good and not keeping my mother awake at night. He actually got leave. I have a photo with him in June. He got leave from his camp and he was able to visit my mother and me. So I have this wonderful picture of him hugging my mother and me in my mother's lap. And I suppose he had the joy of, he had the joy of seeing me in his life once. And then my mother said to me that he was supposed to go back to camp and that he said that he will go to the rabbi on his way back to choose a Hebrew name for me. But I never knew what my Hebrew name was, so until the age of 13, I was Hedi. Never had a Hebrew name, or maybe. And then when on the ship to Israel, when I was 13, the Sochnut agent asked my mother, what's her Hebrew name? And my mother, in an instant, said she's Esther, after my grandmother who perished in Auschwitz. So that's how I acquired Esther at that stage. Maybe I don't remember the original question anymore. So lead me back when you need to.
You were telling us what happened to your father, then he went back to the camp?
They were in the camp until probably November 1944. Either October or November. I'll have to check the postcards, what is the last date that he wrote. I think it was October. And then the whole camp was marched to Germany. And from there, all contact, of course. My mother by then wasn't free either. She was in hiding. So the only way I knew that he then died of starvation is because my aunt did some search and found that his name was reported as in the Dachau victims list. And eventually my aunts actually went to Dachau and were able to collect his things miraculously and bring his things back. And the things that he took with him, because he then by then firmly believed that the only thing that will help him is God. So he had a prayer book, he had a talit, and he had his tefillin. So those are the three items that my aunt brought back. And first I didn't believe that the Germans kept such neat order and organization, and it's really his. But I looked in the prayer book and I found my mother's handwriting in the prayer book. So I knew that it's true and that it was his. So, yes. So Um, so then, and he was such a strong person before the war. He regularly, before he would go to the office in the morning, he would sail. He would he would go and play tennis depending on the season. He would go and ski in Switzerland. He was very, very strong, and they managed to starve him, even being such a strong person. Of course, I didn't know about anything until I was 6.5, and my mother called me one day and she said, "Hedeke, I have something to tell you." And she said, "I want to tell you this before you start school." I was supposed to start school in September that year. And she said, my mother said, "I don't want other people to tell you about this." So until the age of 6.5, I thought that life is all beautiful and peaceful. I had a wonderful adopting father, and I thought that that's it. I didn't know about anything else. And then my mother sat me down, and for hours she told me the stories of our family. And that is just caused me such a breakdown of trust in anything. I was just screaming and crying for days after that. I said to my mother that this can't be true, that maybe she made this up. I can't believe that life is so terrible. But yes, I don't remember the question anymore, sorry. Excuse me. I'm back.
You mentioned, as you were telling me about your father, you mentioned that your mother was in hiding. How was your mother able to save you? And what happened to her?
So let's go a few steps back. She was in the ghetto. And while in the ghetto, my father's sister used to come and visit and bring her supplies and actually take photos. I have photos, and it was sort of almost normal. My father's sisters converted to Catholicism, so they were moving more freely. And they even brought my mother a Wallenberg passport, so that she can also move around freely. So one day the announcement came that all Jews have to go to the brick factory. And my mother, the spiteful and the rebellious, said, "I'm not going." She already guessed what is going to happen there. I think this was later, towards October. And she took my pram and put some supplies in my pram, and she went out to the street. And she started walking. And she thought that it will not be so long, because the rumors were already that the Russians are not very far. And so she thought that this can go on a bit, and then she can go back home. But it went on for days and days, and she had no food for me, and she had no food for herself. And what she would do is walk in the street, and at night she would hide in bombed out shelters of buildings. When she was eventually hungry, she broke into a store, and all there was bags of sugar So she loaded up with sugar and tried to feed herself and me on sugar water. And that, again, didn't last for a while because too long, because I became very, very sick. Now, she said she did have the Wallenberg passport, but she said that she was so scared that she thought that if the Gestapo would have stopped her and asked her, "What's your name?" she would have collapsed in fear and she wouldn't have been able to show them the passport, that she was just so afraid. So when she found that I'm very sick, she started walking. She decided to find the solution. She started walking to the other side of Budapest is made of two cities connected by bridges. We were on the Pest side. She started walking towards Buda, and eventually, when she got there, she found a monastery, and she went and banged on the door and asked to be let in. And a nun came and she asked her, "What do you want?" And she said, "I would like to find a place to stay because we lost our home." And she lied. She said that she is the servant and she rescued the baby. And then Mother Superior came out and she said, "We know you're Jewish, but we will keep the baby." And she left me there. And after that, she continued hiding, but it was easier for her to hide by herself than with the baby. And she continued with the same pattern of walking, hiding, walking, hiding. She didn't have anybody who would hide her. Oh, I have to backtrack here. Yes, there's another stage in the story. She walked first when she packed me up and left the home. She first walked to my father's brother's house and wanted to stay there. And my father's brother came out to the door all pale, and he said, "You can't stay here even 1 minute, and if you stay here, we'll call the police. You have to go away." It was my father's brother, who was also converted to Catholic. He was a converted Catholic. So that's when I will never forgive him that. So my aunt tried to excuse that, saying that he was afraid for his own life, so he had to do that. But anyhow, and that's when she started just moving on and hiding. Luckily the bridges were not bombed yet, so she was able to cross from one side of the city to the other. She was able to cross back as well. And sorry. I can't imagine how she would have survived, really, because I only know that when I knew her, she was such a nervous, she was a wreck. So it must have been very hard. And as a child, I wasn't very understanding, but yeah. But she survived, and after the Russians came in, she went to collect me. And I'll start that story as a separate story.
I wanted to ask you how you were treated by the nuns. I realize you don't have a lot of firsthand memory, but were you healthy?
Yes, I was healthy. I have some bits of evidence. When my mother collected me, I had a little aluminum necklace with a Hungarian cross on my neck. And I imagine that they have converted me or threw some holy water on me. And I was very healthy. When my mother collected me, she wanted to make sure that it's me and it's not somebody else's baby. So she looked at me and verified. She said I looked exactly like my father's sister. There was no way to think that it was a mistake. And then they treated me well because they actually wanted to rescue me for Christianity. They wanted to bring me up as a Catholic. So I was lucky. I was many years was very angry with the nuns, thinking that they only wanted to rescue me for the sake of their religion and not as a human being. I was very resentful of that. Until in 2010, when I went to visit Hungary, first time, went back, and found out that the whole place, when the Russians came, they took out all the nuns and all the, all the priests, everybody they took out in front of the monastery, and they shot all of them. So none of them survived, and there was bad karma, I would say, bad spirit on all sides. So then I was feeling that they still rescued me, and they had some they had some humanity. So I was then feeling very bad. I found out that there is a researcher who was researching this place, and I was able to talk to him and find out what happened. But anyhow, yes, that was a miracle that they saved me. And when my mother came to collect me from there, and they did not want to give me back, they told my mother that we rescued her and we'll keep her, we'll bring her up as a good Christian. And my mother, when she was holding me, she put her hands here on my throat, and she said, "You will never have her. I will kill her and kill myself, but you will never have her." And then they saw her eyes, and they knew that she means it, and they released me. And I know that my mother told me the true story, because I experienced that a few times in my life. Whenever there was risk of any kind, the Hungarian Revolution, that there was fighting, my mother would hide me behind the curtain and put her hand there and said, if they're coming and they will be shooting, I'll kill both of us. So I know that she must have been in terrible mental state at the time. Yeah. She survived the war, and there's more stories of how she survived.
Will you share them?
Sure. So when the Russians came in, she had nowhere to go because her home was taken over. She didn't have anywhere to go. So she was staying in a shelter in one of the buildings, and Russian soldiers came looking for women. And mother says that other people would throw their babies away when the Russian soldiers would take them. She was totally in fear that that will happen to her. So they wanted to take her. And she started screaming. She was screaming the Hebrew prayer, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. That she was screaming. Somebody from the back of the Russian soldiers yelled out, "Don't touch her, she's my sister." So, unbeknownst to her, that was my mother's brother who came with the Russian soldiers to look for his sister. So, the soldiers didn't touch my mother. He went to my mother, he picked me up and he said, I was still very, very tiny in the sense that I was underweight and everything. He unzipped his jacket. No, there were no zips at the time. I'm introducing something. He unbuttoned his jacket and put me inside his jacket, grabbed my mother by the hand and said, we're going to go home and we'll look for our family. So he took my mother to their hometown, which was Nagyvárad in Hungarian, or in Romanian called Oradea Mare. And he took her there. At the time, she still didn't know anything about her husband or her parents or anything else. But we went there, and my mother's brother did not know about his wife having perished in the Holocaust either. But they went back and he rented a small basement for her and a little place for himself. And he started working and he was looking after her. And I even have memories from, I wasn't 2 yet. At one stage, my mother decided that she wants to go back to Budapest to look for her husband. And she went back to Budapest with me. And he went to visit my father's sister. And she told her that my father was among the victims because the names were published. So that she is now a widow. So she then tried going back to Oradea or Nagyvárad with me, but by then there was a political border. The Romanians were given that part of Hungary and she couldn't legally go back. So she had to be smuggled back. She had to bribe somebody. My memory from there was that what I remember sort of intensively is being dark and my mother holding my mouth to shut me up. I was almost choking. And there were bright lights, flashlights in my eyes. And then eventually the bright lights were gone. And I heard voices that I did not understand because it must have been in Romanian. And then my mother released her hand. And turns out that the peasant who was smuggling us into Romania overloaded his carriage and put a lot of hay on top of us to cover us. And when he was turning a corner, it turned over. So that's when the border police found out that there's something going on and started searching. So my mother kept me quiet and they never discovered us. They just thought that it's just a stupid peasant not knowing how to do with his horses. And then we got back to our place in Oradea. And so she survived, my uncle survived. My uncle was amazing, wonderful. He looked after us, and I was adoring him. And until one day, somebody came to visit and say hello to me. I did not know whether I don't have a father or anything like that. And somebody came, and I was standing in my cot, and I was chewing a sweet on a lolly. And he came with a big smile, and I took the lolly out from my mouth and handed it to him because he looked so nice. And I fell instantly in love with him. I was just almost 2. And he married my mother. He also lost his wife and his 2 girls. And he felt that the pain is so unbearable. And he went to the rabbi and said to the rabbi that, please find me a woman in the same situation who lost her husband with a baby, because I have so much love I need to provide for somebody in this situation and make somebody else happy. So, unbeknownst to him, my mother went to the rabbi at the same time, or just before, a few days, plus or minus, went to the rabbi and said, Rabbi, I can't cope. I can't handle a child, and I want my child to have a father. And the rabbi said, introduce them. And that's how they found each other. So that's just one of the many miracles that happened. And they married. And I sort of grew up not knowing. I thought he's my father. I didn't know that I had another father until I was 6.5, as I said. And my mother told me the stories of what happened to our family. I was a very happy child. Hindsight, I know that I remember my father took me for the first walk. And I was so much entertained. And we were late coming back. I did not know that we were late coming back, but I know that as we got back to the apartment, my mother opened the door and she started beating my father. I didn't know why. She was beating him because she saw that her baby is lost. And she just always was in such a nervous wreck stage of worrying about her baby. So, yeah. But it was really very good for me to have a father. That's it. I'm sorry, I'm just talking from my point of view, but my mother must have had such a hard time. That's all right. I'm together now.
I do have a few questions that I wanted to ask you. Do you have any idea how long you were with the nuns?
Likely from October to April. Maybe March sometime. I've been trying to figure out that date, but I don't have a reliable. I know from October when my mother had to go in hiding, probably a few weeks into October. And I know that the Russians were in Budapest by April, so somewhere in between that window.
Can you share with us what happened to your adoptive father's first family, his wife and child?
Yes, well, I would have liked to show their pictures, but
We'll do that later.
we'll do it later. Yes, first of all, his name was Klein Moore, and he was taken to a labor camp on the border of Hungary and Austria. And he was working there. I understand that he was feeding the cows. I know the story that one day he was so hungry that he got a carrot from that he was supposed to feed to the cows, and he took a bite, and he was caught. And they beat him so much that he lost his consciousness. And that's when he also lost his hearing on one side. But he survived. He became very, very sick with typhoid fever. And the guards already saw that he is dead, so they threw him on the pile of dead. And he was lying there for a while, and then he was smelling smoke. And because he was smelling smoke, and it's a sort of alarm, he started crawling. And he crawled out from under the pile of dead, and he continued crawling. And Russian soldiers found him. So so Russian soldiers found him and gave him food. And he and one more person was also crawling with him. And he warned the other person when they were being fed that please be very careful, eat just a tiny little bit, because our stomachs have shrunk so much that we will not be able to handle the food. And that other person was just overwhelmed by the food and couldn't stop eating. And he died within hours. But my father was very, very careful and ate little by little, a little more every day, and he survived. Only later he found out what happened was that the Hungarians, the guards were Hungarians. They locked in all the inmates. When the Russians were coming, they locked everybody into the barracks and set the whole place on fire. That's why he was smelling smoke. So, and then they were running away. The guards were running away. So it was his luck to be thrown out amongst the dead, because would he have been healthy, he would have been burned to death. Nobody escaped being locked in. And then slowly, slowly, he made his way to his family home, which was in Hungary. And before I start on this story, I would like a break. I need to go to...
We can take a break.
Yes, please.
Okay, we are back now. And I had asked you what happened to your adoptive father's family, and you had told us what happened to him. Mm-hmm. And then we took a break. What happened to his wife and child?
But just 1 second, I'll continue with him because he's not there yet. He then was able to make it back to his home village and found that two of his nieces were there, were also released from camps. And they had potatoes on their farm. And he fed his nieces and himself on potatoes because they had nothing else for a few months. And And eventually the two nieces were taken in by Sweden. So he then went back to his hometown, which is the same hometown which was my mother's hometown, Nagyvárad or Oradea. He went back to his hometown, and he found that his wife and two daughters have... He already sort of knew, because the rumors were that nobody from his town, all the women and children were taken to Auschwitz, and nobody returned. But he then found the real stories, and he knew that he is unfortunately a widow, and he lost his two girls. There is nothing... He also... The Jews from there were taken before the Jews from Budapest, so they were taken like I think in May 1944 or something. My grandparents were taken in June 1944, but his wife and two daughters were taken in May. And yeah, so he started he was very positive, very proactive. His saying was always, it could always be worse, or Gamzeli Tova, this is also for better, this is also a blessing. So he started gathering, he had lots of nieces, all in his family. He was the only boy, I think. His sisters all had daughters. So he started encountering more of the nieces who survived, and he would try finding husbands for them. And he was busy with that until he decided he can't take this anymore. So, yeah. And that's when he found my mother.
Let me ask you about extended members of your own family. Do you know what happened?
I just want to go back one step to his daughters, because the way I knew about his daughters is that as I was growing up, he was always hiding in the storeroom, and I would hear crying. So even though he married my mother and he had me, every day he would take out the pictures of his two daughters and just cry and say a prayer, and then get back up and be his positive, nice self as usual. But he had to pour his heart out. And so I have those pictures. Okay. Now, what happened to other people in the family? Sure.
In your family, yes.
Yes, in my family. Okay, so first, my father's family, we know that he had two sisters and a brother, and they were all converted. And after the war, they did not bother to convert back. They stayed Christians. When my mother went and told my aunt that she wants to remarry, she and then her sister and brother were furious with her. And how can she already forget about her husband? And she said, no, I'm not forgetting, but I need to have a husband for the sake of this child. And they said, no, we'll adopt the child, and you can't have her. If you're gonna get married, you can't have her. So they actually tried to make some legal moves to take me away from her. And I think part of the reason she needed to escape back to Romania is because she wanted to be able to marry and not be adopted by them. Okay, so my father's sisters and brother never had any children, so there is no family there at all. but my mother's parents were taken to Auschwitz. I often ask myself, they were very much believers of how did I merit to survive? How did my mother merit to survive when so many people did not merit to survive? And I have all their letters and believing that this will be over soon and we'll see that God will help us. And I don't think God listened. So that's what happened to my mother's parents. Then my mother's oldest brother, his name was Roth Ernest, or Duvi in Hebrew. He was a cantor and an opera singer. I think that he was the canary in the mine. He lived in Vienna, and he was getting quite famous. He was singing in the Volksopera in Vienna. And after the Germans, Kristallnacht, and then the Germans came into Austria, he decided that he is going to go and run away, that he doesn't trust the Germans. And he started moving east. He was moving east. First he got a job as a cantor in the Grand Synagogue in Bucharest. And he was singing there, and my grandparents got letters from him from there. Then he continued from there further east because the Germans were moving towards Romania. And he moved further east, and he ended up in Ukraine, or what you call Ukraine, but in Russian you say Ukraina. The Russians put the Jews in a camp there. So he was in a camp, and he was with his good friend, who is also a cantor, who did escape. And apparently I met him, and he was telling me the story that one day the Russians came with a truck, and they were collecting young people to take as laborers to Siberia. So my uncle was picked, but he wasn't picked because he was older. So my uncle was picked, he got on this truck, he was taken away. We never heard from him since. We've been searching and searching, and we never heard. We tried all sorts of Red Cross and Russian documents and everything. Probably there are no documents, but anyhow, I know from my grandparents were still alive when this happened, and I have a letter from them asking my mother, "Do you know what happened to Dewey? We haven't heard from him for such a long time." So yes, he disappeared, probably died. So that's the oldest. The sister was in Budapest, and she just died from an illness that I don't know, it couldn't be treated. Then the next brother, Ali, he was in a Hungarian forced labor camp, and I have lots of letters from him, and he even visited my mother while my mother was in the ghetto. He came to visit in the ghetto. So the labor camps allowed people to have vacation. And not only he visited my mother, but he was allowed to go back to Romania, or at the time it wasn't Romania, to Hungary, and he got married. And he spent one day with his wife. And then he went back to the camp. And sometime around December, the camp was liquidated, and they were all supposed to march towards Germany. And I understand that when they reached Gunskirchen, the place, there was a famous pogrom there, and many of the Jews were butchered, and he was killed there. So, and then there was my mother's other brother, Oscar, wrote Oscar, and he was a total non-believer. He always criticized religion, and he was very much defiant, I would say. And there's a story when once he went home and visited, my grandmother was wearing sheitel, a wig, and she constantly got skin infections from wearing a wig. And he came home and he found out that she again has a skin infection, and he pulled off her wig and threw it in the fire and told her, from now on, you're not going to wear a wig. So from there on, she only covered her head with a scarf, but that's what happened. So he was this sort of totally, I'll do something different than everybody else person. He was also he wasn't in a camp. His unit was attached to German soldiers. And his unit was following the German soldiers in their war against the Russians. And as he was serving the German soldiers, the story from him was that he always laughed. And even when he didn't laugh, his eyes smiled. He survived, so I know him. I loved him. And one day a German officer told me that if you keep smiling, I'll cut that face off together with the smile. And that's when he decided it's time to run away. So he ran away. So he ran away somewhere in Russia from his German unit, and he joined the Russian soldiers. And then he progressed with them, and he said, well, I may as well serve the Russians. And he had a good time. They related to him as a person, and he progressed with them as they were fighting their way. He was helping them, and they were helping him. And he made his way, as you know the end of the story, he made his way to Budapest. And then he took my mother back. He was living in Oradea, married a second time. He had a wife, and his wife was taken to Auschwitz, but he married the second time, and second time he had 2 daughters. And the 2 daughters are still alive in Israel. So there's a bit of happy end. When I ask myself what helped him to survive, both my mother and he were spiteful. Opposite, always do the opposite from they are told. And that's how they survived. I don't know, I can't analyze any more than that, but they just... So he saved my mother, he saved himself, he saved me. But then when I tell the story to my son, the psychologist, said, your mother didn't save you, you saved your mother. Because if you would not have been alive, your mother would not have had the capacity and the wish and the will to survive. It's only because she knew that she has to save you, that she lived to be there for another day for you. So that's it. And that's the end of the brothers and sisters. So myself and my two cousins are the only survivors. Descendants, maybe I should say descendants.
Much of what you shared with us so far has been what you were told. What are some of your personal earliest memories?
My earliest memory, as I said, is when my mother was trying to go back to Romania, and we were in the carriage, and the carriage got turned over. My adopting father would regularly take us to survivors' gatherings. I even have a photo, both him and my mother. I appear in both of the photos. And we would meet lots of other men and women who survived the Holocaust. And I know that so many people would be patting me, so nice, because they couldn't believe that I actually was born in 1944. Some of them had children after the war, but none of them had children born during the war or before. All the children were exterminated, killed, whatever. So all the people wanted to touch me and see me. And I remember going to synagogue on Yahrzeit, and I remember everybody crying. I would not understand why crying. And then I remember when I would stay inside the Yahrzeit with my mother, and the women would say, oh, she has to be taken out. She can't stay inside. And my mother would tell them that she has to stay inside. She lost her father, and she has to say the prayers for a Yahrzeit. I remember lots of people crying and crying. I didn't understand. So I would say the prayer for Yahrzeit, but at the time I still didn't know why I'm doing that. No, I don't really have any memories from the war. I was too little.
You had told us before.
Everything is secondhand.
You had told us some of the steps that you took with your family after the war. Can you pick up the story and tell us what happened next?
Which part of the family after the war? Sorry.
No, your family, your experiences after the war.
Oh, my experience after the war. Okay.
Yeah. What happened? You started to tell us the first few steps to rebuilding a life, and I want you to continue what happened.
Okay. So when my mother got married, and I was a very, very happy child, but she was not happy. She was constantly, she had blood pressure of 200, which doctors almost thought that it's almost unbelievable. And she never rebuilt her life, except the only good thing she did is remarry so that I'll be looked after. But she was always a nervous breakdown, and had nervous breakdown and nervous wreck, and my father, my adopting father, was providing us beautifully. He recovered his wish to work and make a living, and he provided. At one stage, they were trying to leave Romania. Romania was very restrictive, and plus they wanted to go not just back to Hungary, but they wanted to go further west. And they found that Romania wouldn't let them go. So it took a few years of applying for going west. And by the time they got a permission to go to Hungary, the border between Hungary and Austria got hermetically closed. So they got to Hungary, but they could not go any further from Hungary. So we lived for a few years in Hungary. And there was the October Revolution, 1956, in Hungary. And I experienced anti-Semitism here and there, not constantly, but when there was an opportunity to leave Hungary, my mother wanted to go to America, my father wanted to go to Israel, and they asked me as an only child of where do you want to go? And I said, I only want to go to Israel. I would never want to experience anti-Semitism again. And that's our home. So that's how we went from Hungary to Israel. And I was blessed to experience being Jewish, freely being Jewish. I don't know. I mean, I don't remember experiencing the Holocaust, but I remember when I was 7, I was in hospital. I had hepatitis, and there was a Jewish girl next to us in another bed, and 2 girls conspired and got razor blades, and they cut her. And when the nurse came to find out what happened, they lied. We don't know what's going on, but I saw it. And that, they said that they do it because she's Jewish and we want to cut her. So I just experienced what it is like being Jewish in Hungary. But, I really, before the 1944, I don't have direct experiences, just stories.
So you said you wanted to go to Israel.
Yes. So that's how we applied to go to Israel.
And when was this? When did you go?
July 1957. And that was an amazing new life. New language, new culture. I loved being in Israel. I still do.
Before we get too far into Israel, I wanted to stop you for just a second and ask, is there anything about your time in Europe that you did not yet talk about that you want to share before we move on to Israel?
Let me just try to think. Can I look in my photos as a reminder?
You can take a quick look, yeah.
Yes, I didn't share with you my uncle's story. I was talking about the brothers. I think that is a sad story, Holocaust story. My mother had an uncle. My grandfather's brother was Rabbi Roth Samuel. And he was the beloved rabbi of a place called Sátor Alja-Újhely, which is now it's still in Hungary. It's on the border between Slovakia and Hungary. And when his community heard rumors about the Holocaust, They raised money to rescue him and his wife. They bought them tickets to get out from Slovakia. And he refused. He said that he was the principal of a boys' school, and he said, if these children need me anytime in their lives, it's now. How can I leave them? They have fear, they need so much reassurance. I have to stay with my community, I have to stay with these children. So he and his wife refused to go and stayed. And they were taken together with the community to Auschwitz and all extinguished. He wrote a letter to me addressed in my name on the 5th of May, I think, after I was born. And the community, that community, his town, was emptied of Jews, put on the trains just a day after, I think. Maybe I got the dates wrong. Maybe he wrote the letter on the 15th of May, and the community was what's the word? Liquidated. The community was liquidated on the 16th of May. So he was a very important figure in our family. He and his wife were both leaders, and I'm just wondering, I mean, he was certainly, being religious didn't help you. That's the only person I wanted to add.
Okay, we can move now on to Israel. What were your expectations of Israel, and what were your first impressions?
My adoptive father he and I loved going to a library and reading books. And he thought that Israel is a place where we will eat dates and we live in tents and sort of biblical stories. Nothing modern. And when we arrived to Israel, it was not at all what we expected. We went to Israel we sailed on a ship via Italy, from Italy to Haifa. And when we arrived, the Sukhnut distributed people into different settlements, and we were assigned to go to Zichron Yaakov. Zichron Yaakov is now a place of choice, but at the time it was just a rocky hillside with just a few houses, but nothing else. No electricity, no heating, no cooking, nothing. And that's after Budapest was quite a shock to my mother. My father would just sing with happiness, "This is the land of Israel, this is where I belong, this is where God sent me." And I followed him with my joy. Now, at the time, we had sort of units back to back. There was another Hungarian family behind us, a father, a mother, and a boy. The boy was just 1 year younger, like all the children were always 1 year younger than I was, because they were after Holocaust. And they couldn't take it, couldn't take the culture shock. And one day they gave their only son to um, a church, they signed that they allowed them to adopt him. And then they took poison and killed themselves. They couldn't take it. My father was the sort of energy behind our adaptation. The nights were, the rest of the houses were occupied by Moroccan immigrants. And was a difficult experience having come from Hungary. The Moroccan men would beat their wives, and the wives would be screaming at night. And that was a difficult experience. And then eventually my parents took me to a kibbutz, and I was schooled in a kibbutz for a while so that they can find their footing, they can organize themselves. I loved it. It was a new language. I loved languages even then. It was a new language, and then while in the kibbutz I had a friend from Poland, and she was teaching me Polish, and I just loved the experience. And after a while we moved to a different town, and I enjoyed being in Israel. Was my adopting father adapted by, he was buying goods from the market and reselling them. He never wanted to do anything more serious because he felt that he is already old and his hearing is not good, and when they beat his head he got sort of memory loss problems in the life, and so he never got himself a good parnasa, a good livelihood, except carrying always two suitcases and selling it to stores. So I was already 13. I learned something in Hungarian summer camp, how to make handbags from plastic, and I taught my mother how to do it. So the two of us would, during summer holiday, would day and night sit and make handbags, and my father would sell them. And then later when school started, my mother already learned how to make it well. So that's what we lived on for a while. And then by the time I was 14, I was able to tutor other children. I was tutoring other children in mathematics and in English. I learned English there in school. So I was earning money. And then what else? I was also making, drawing placards and signs and things for the school. I loved drawing. So I was doing I had lots of initiatives, like how to keep my family afloat. And they certainly didn't have to pay for my upkeep, only for themselves. So, yeah.
Can I ask you which kibbutz?
Alonei Yitzhak. Alonei Yitzhak. It's near, oops, I need my husband to find it on the map. The interesting thing is that later when I met my husband, he was in that same kibbutz, but 5 years later. My husband is 5 years younger than I am. So, I don't know, God just must have thought that, I still believe in God despite of everything. God must have thought that it's too early for me to be introduced to him, or whatever. But our lives crossed. And later on, when our lives crossed, we met. It was incredible chance. And only many, many, many years later, my mother was very upset that I don't marry somebody from Hungary. And I very much was independent. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I wanted to marry whom I want to. And only years later, I found that my mother should have known, didn't know, that my husband is my 8th cousin. Our 9th grandparents were the same people. This was, whether this was coincidence or not, but the Haredim say that it's divine supervision. I wish she would have known. She would have been more reassured. But she did not. She died before she found that. Yeah.
When you got to Israel,
yes,
you with your parents, what did the Israelis ask you about your Holocaust experiences?
Nothing. I never wanted to talk about it. I wanted to be strong and not to be seen to be. I thought that Holocaust is a weakness, that it just happened because we Jews were weak and allowed ourselves to be taken advantage of. And I'm going to grow up and I'll be very strong, and it could never happen in my lifetime. So, yeah, in fact, I almost feel sorry now I'm talking to you that I'm breaking down and crying, because as I was growing up, I was always trying to be robust. But
how much education?
Oh, sorry. My teacher knew that I'm a Holocaust survivor, but I asked him not to tell the other children. It was already embarrassing enough. I was an Ola Chadasha, a new migrant, and my teacher would tell the other children that she's an Ola Chadasha, and they have to help me a little bit with Hebrew and the biblical studies. And I had to prove very quickly that they don't need to help me. I can do anything all by myself. Sorry, I interrupted your question.
No, that's fine. I was going to ask you about the education that you were able to get in Israel, and you were telling me about it, so that was perfect. Mm-hmm. Would you like to add?
Unfortunately, my mother, who was always so fearing for my welfare, didn't allow me to choose what I wanted to do. I wanted to study architecture, but the School of Architecture was in Haifa, and that was too far for her. So she didn't want me to go to a School of Architecture, and so I felt like that was a loss. And she wanted me to become a mathematics teacher, because math teachers always make a good living. So I went, and so she found for me Bar Ilan University, which is near. It was bus distance from home. And I studied mathematics. Later I became a math teacher. I taught in high school 1 year, and I didn't like it. So that's when I started wondering about and changing, doing this and doing that. I went back to university. I worked at university as a scientific computer programmer using my mathematics. But at the university, that was at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and at university, I went back and took up starts with an A, archaeology. and I started studying archaeology. And that again, the divine supervision, because my husband was doing his PhD in archaeology, and that's how I met him. So this way and that way and that way, and I changed my profession and changed many times. I then started working later on, but I changed my husband's profession and told him to be an ecologist. And then we both became ecologists and then went on our joint paths around the world. Yes, all my life, my mother's fear was keeping me, just like she was trying to choke me and keeping me down. My mother's fear was keeping me back. You can't do this, you can't do that. And all my life, because of her Holocaust experience, I wanted to prove that I can do anything and everything, and was doing impossible things. My husband and I went to the end of the world. Our first field work was in Tierra del Fuego, literally end of the world. Ushuaia was the very bottom of the island, at the bottom of South American continent.
Before I have your world travels,
Okay.
I wanted to ask you how long you were in Israel and if you ever served in the military.
No, I unfortunately did not. When I finished high school, I was determined to go to the military. And I went to the pre-screening. Actually, I didn't finish high school yet. I was younger. I went to a pre-screening for the military. And I thought I passed. And the end of the line, when the girls were getting dressed, a doctor came and said, "Hey, you, can you come back?" And I didn't know what was going on, but they took me back and they listened to my heart again. And then they said, "Oh, we're going to delay your joining the army by a few months, and you'll have to come back and have another checkup." They found a heart murmur, and they said, "With that, you cannot be drafted into the army." So in a few months, I had to come back and had another check, and then they said, "Oh, we'll have to postpone again and come back in a few months." That's when I started studying at university, because first I wanted to go to the army. And years went by, and I had checkups, and eventually I was dismissed as not fit for the army.
When did you leave Israel?
I haven't really left. I'm always back. But I met my husband in 1973, and he and I got married in London. And that's when I started going away and coming back, going away, but never sort of really leaving, but going away and coming back. I'm going around the world, but I still am Israeli. I may keep a home there, and very much involved with things that's happening there.
Did you live in the UK for a while, or you just got married there?
So we got married and lived there for 5 years while my husband was doing his PhD. And then he had a fellowship at Durham University, and I still lived there.
What did you do while he studied?
First, I taught him computer programming, taught him to use computers, so that's how he started with his projects. Then I illustrated his PhD, and I could show you that too. Then I worked, basically we did field work together. And that's when I decided that it's more important for me not to continue with my own career, but because if I work with him, then I can always be with him. So I just worked with him. Had 2 children in the UK. And then the 3rd one in Australia.
How did you come to be in Australia?
At one stage, we were very concerned about the environment and ecology, and we have decided that Australia is an ideal place to be. And it's administrative stories and whatever, but we decided to move to Australia, and we did.
I wanted to ask you if you experienced any anti-Semitism in either the UK or Australia.
Try to think. Not in UK, but there was we had my son was born in the UK, and we had a Brit, and there was a very Orthodox community where the Moel came from. And at the time, he was telling us that the UK is fine. My parents came from Israel for the Brit, and we only knew 2 Jewish people from my husband's university, but non-Jews came to attend, and that was fine. So I understand now that there is anti-Semitism there, but at the time we had no experience. Then in Australia, I don't think there was or is anti-Semitism really. There was more, what I experienced in Australia is anti-foreign, anti-immigrant, but we went a very different way from most people anyway. We bought a neglected a farm, and we turned it into an orchard in the very far north of Queensland, which is tropical, and the people who live there are very different from, it's not city living, it's out in the wilderness. And, I started the first Jewish community in the far north Queensland. There was one Jewish family in the city of Cairns in far north Queensland, and we started doing high holiday services there. And my husband would lead the prayer, and he didn't even know very much. Yeah, no anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish experiences.
How long did you stay in Australia?
20 years. We still go back
regularly. When did you leave?
We haven't left. We go back regularly. We spend several months every time we have, except during COVID. I have a daughter, 2 grandchildren, son-in-law there. We don't have our farm anymore. We sold it. But we keep in close touch with the Jewish community of Brisbane, with the rabbi, and my husband is a Kohen, and he regularly, when we're there, he relies on my husband to have the Kohen blessings, because they don't have a Kohen. So we live in lots of different spaces, physically and time, and different attachments, different lives.
Where did you go when
I
you left?
understand that there is no Holocaust museum there, and the rabbi, we are corresponding, and he is excited and it was the first time that we'll be back that the Holocaust museum is open. He wants me to see that.
When did you leave Australia and where did you go next?
To think. 1999, we moved from Australia to Hawaii. And we stayed there for a year. From Hawaii, we moved to Washington, D.C. in year 2000. But again, it's when I say we moved, it's not like other people move and then they stay stable. When we moved to Hawaii in that year, we spent the year going back and forth to China, working there. When we moved to the US, we worked in South America and spent the whole time going back and forth. And we would stop in Israel on the way whenever. It's not exactly on the way, but yeah, we did that.
What are some of the challenges you've had to overcome going from place to place and back and forth and moving around so much?
Since I had fun, I don't think there were challenges. I think the biggest challenge was every time to make sure that my parents don't worry. The most extreme story, we lived for a year in the Philippines, so I haven't included that. That year in the Philippines was during the 20 years of Australian living. And while we were in the Philippines, there was a coup. And the world knew that there was fighting in the Philippines. And I remember my mother's very worried voice phoning. And the children said, "What are you going to tell your mother?" And there was noises of shooting outside. And I rushed with the phone and plugged it in the bathroom where you can't hear any shooting. And my mother would ask me, "How are you?" And I said, "We are fine. It's just so nice here." I was telling her stories. And now she didn't know that we are in any way endangered. And a few days later, we were evacuated. The Australian embassy evacuated us. And it was Shabbat. And my husband was in the synagogue. And how was it? Yeah, the children and I went home first, but my husband was still in the synagogue. And we had this call from the Australian embassy saying, "You must leave home now, we'll come with a car and pick you up, and we are taking you." And I said, "I'm not going without my husband." I said, "Well, we'll pick him up too." I said, "You can't pick him up. He is in the synagogue and it's Shabbat and he will not travel with you on Shabbat." So they did not pick us up. We stayed home. There were snipers on the roof. There was a lot of things going on. And they evacuated all the people with Australian passports to the Australian embassy. During that time, no, it wasn't. I was there with them, I remember. We were in the synagogue with an Israeli, and we were running along the walls, bending over commando style, so that we are not going to be shot. And my son absolutely admired him and me. He said, "Mom, where did you learn that if you didn't go to the army?" Anyhow, so that's how we got home. No, I didn't go ahead. I went with the children, and we were bending over and watching for snipers, and that's how. And this Israeli guy was leading us. And turned out, we found out later that all the people who were evacuated to the Australian embassy actually got surrounded. The rebels surrounded the building. And they were like under siege for days. They had no food and nothing. They were under siege in the embassy building. And we were at home and we just did whatever we wanted to do. We had the good luck of not going to the embassy because of Shabbat. Anyhow, so the biggest challenge was making sure that my mother is not worried, because her worries were always so overwhelming that I couldn't handle that. Somewhere along the way, the other challenge was, I'm trying to remember when this happened. I came down with a massive brain tumor. That was in Australia. And again, I was trying to hide that from my mother. That was the biggest challenge. I had surgery, and I had pretty much, I was a bit of a vegetable for a while. I couldn't speak, but eventually I got my speech back, and that's how we were able to go to Israel to do the bar mitzvah for my son. Yeah, that was my son's bar mitzvah was straight after the Philippines. I don't know, things are a bit mixed up. After the Philippines, we had the bar mitzvah in Israel, and I felt my husband insisted that he has to do it with my father, because my father didn't have any children of his own. It's very important that my son that he will do the aliyah in the synagogue with my son. And yeah, it was very touching. Anyhow, I think I distracted you with another story.
What have you told your children about your early years? What do they know?
About the Holocaust?
About your early childhood.
About my early childhood. Well, I must have told them quite a bit, because when my son looked at me and said, "Mother, it's really not your mother who saved you, but you saved your mother," he must have known. I think that when they would ask, I would tell. I very much was determined later on, not early stage. Earlier, when I was young, I was embarrassed about it. I felt that having gone through the Holocaust is some kind of a stigma. But later on, I felt very much like I want to talk to them. And I told them what I knew. And now I haven't really talked to my grandchildren yet, but I keep thinking that I want to go to my grandchildren's school and talk to them one year. There's one more important person in my life I haven't even, speaking of Holocaust, that I haven't mentioned. My mother had a cousin in Slovakia, and she was 13 when she was taken to Auschwitz. And she was a big girl, so when she was going to the table with Mengele and the selection, she said that she is 16, and Mengele smoothed her hair and said, "Look, a blonde," and he sent her to the side of the living. My mother's family were quite blonde with green and blue eyes. So he sent her to the side of the living, And she grabbed her mother and her aunt and pulled them with her. So they were allowed to go to the side of the living as well. They also wanted to grab another aunt, but that other aunt was not allowed to go. And in fact, that other aunt, Aunt Serena, was shot by one of the guards on the spot and collapsed and was cleared away. But my aunt, Ellie, was her nickname, Livia was her official name, worked her way through Auschwitz and saved her mother and her aunt. And later, when she was after Auschwitz, she became a student of Jewish history, and she wrote books about her Auschwitz experience. One of her books was translated to 70 languages. No, I don't have the copies. In fact, I gave the children the copies I had, so they read her stories. And they adored her and admired her. So.
What was her full name and the name of her book?
Something like I Could Have Lived 1,000 Years was her first book. And another book was called Ellie, which is her nickname. And she is the one who used to go into Germany and lecture in schools. After the interview, I can find the reference to the book and send you the link. It was funny, her book was translated to 70 languages, but not Hebrew until recently, when the family complained that it has to be translated. She wrote it in English.
Have you personally experienced nightmares or flashbacks to the war years?
In a way, yes.
Your very early years?
Yes, though I may not be able to identify it. When we worked in Argentina, I almost miscarried. That was my first pregnancy. And I was taken to hospital. And I remember that a priest came around to all the ladies. And when he came near my bed, I started screaming, "Don't come near me, don't come near me." I don't know why it was so intensive. And so he went away, but I always had very strong reaction to, maybe that's through my mother, but I had that reaction. But then other times, I always had difficult reaction with smoke and fires. And one time I woke up in a sort of nightmare, and that they're burning the bodies, screaming. But then I recovered. I always was I always say to myself, I have to be very strong, and that's not appropriate. You have to give strength. I always felt responsible for my parents. I always felt sorry for their Holocaust stories. And I always felt like I have to be the one who, just like I was the one who taught my mother something to do for a living, I always felt that I'm responsible for their welfare, and I have to prove them that their own life is not so terrible, that I'll show them how beautiful life is.
How do you think your parents' attitude influenced their survival?
Very differently. Yeah. My mother, the spiteful who ran away, I don't think that she would have survived if she went to the brick factory when all the people were called to go there. So I think that her defiance and spitefulness enabled her to survive. My biological father's, he was always a compliant person from all the letters, everything. His compliance might have influenced his lack of survival. And I think that my adopting father's good nature, he was always reassuring for everybody, always wanted to do good things. He was always, whenever there was a crowd of people, he was always the center of attention, in the sense that he was always soothing if anybody was angry, or he was always wanting to be nice to everybody. But I don't know whether, if the coincidence wouldn't have happened of the Russians coming when he was on the death pile, he could have perished on the death pile a day later. I don't know. I don't know, and I don't know who has the answers. I think that whether God has the answers, I don't know. I know that my mother's attitude influenced me an awful lot, as well as that I was going through phases when I was very strong. I was going through phases when I was very weak. And then what would just stop me from being weak is I would say to myself, no, I can't afford this. We Jews have to survive. Our family has to survive. If I don't survive, then my biological father will not have anybody. My adopting father will not have anybody. That I have to hold up I don't know the word for it. Don't put a word in it. Anyhow, I have to be the strong one. And my adopting father's attitude influenced me tremendously. He's always saying, thanks God for this, too. Always gave me strength of saying, okay, thanks God for whatever happened, can't complain. I need a second of just gathering my breath. Excuse me. Am I still on camera?
Yes. Do you need to take a break?
Yes, I need to take a breath, water, and whatever. Feeling weak.
Okay, let's
all this talking makes me.
Okay, we're back. And I have just a few more questions. You once told me that being deprived of a family shaped your life. Can you please elaborate on that?
made a difference to my life. I don't think it shaped entirely. I was the lucky one who had an adopting father, and therefore I was cared for. I would say I was deprived of grandparents. I was deprived of loving aunts and uncles. And reading through their letters, I know my grandparents were in their 60s. I was their first grandchild. For some reason, they had lots of problems in the family, and my uncles were not married or didn't have any children. So I was this much awaited grandchild when they were in their 60s. And so it just was a tragedy that they could not be part of, we could not live together. Luckily, my aunt sent photos to my grandparents before they were taken to Auschwitz. And I have actually a letter from them saying how happy they were. And they are just looking at my photo, and they keep pinching my cheeks in the photo. So, but it's a totally different life. I was an only child. Sometimes I was a sad child. I was a loner. I didn't make easily friends. I liked hiding in my books. And I had my mother and my adopting father, but I always felt that I would have loved a brother or a sister. That I had nobody to talk to, nobody who understands me. And I also feel that my being weak, now we're talking about a different topic, that in a way the war shaped my life, because I was always with health problems from very early on. And my mother's opinion was that because I was taken out with forceps, and my heart problem is really not a heart problem, but that the forceps compressed the heart. And later it was confirmed by doctors. So that was one of my health problems, and would the war not have happened, then I would have been healthy. But who knows? I don't know. That's all.
You also wanted me to ask you about miracles in your life, and you mentioned a couple of them. Were there any other miracles you wanted to add?
Well, I mentioned miracles in my mother's life. But then later there were miracles in my life. I suppose when I was there as a baby, so that was a miracle in my life too, that I was rescued. But then there were miracles later in my life that when I had my brain tumor, the surgeon who operated said afterwards, if she would have waited another day, we would not have been able to operate because the tumor was so large. Now, he sort of put it as if it were my responsibility to complain. But it was a miracle that I was saved from this brain tumor, when I've seen others in the hospital who didn't survive. It was a miracle that I met my husband, very much a miracle. And when I met my husband, he was so perfect for me. It turned out that he and I have the same birthday. His mother is a fashion designer, and so was my mother. So many things were just like we were the perfect match. And that was even before we discovered that we are cousins. So yes, that was a miracle. I think that that's plenty for a lifetime. Maybe it's also a miracle that my first pregnancy, I was near losing it. And by being put in pregnancy guarding, I had to lay in bed for 3 months, for the first 3 months. I saved my baby, and she is now a beautiful mother of 2 lovely girls, and she has a wonderful life, and so that was a miracle.
I have to ask you how your life has changed since October 7th, and how you see the world now, if that has also changed.
It was very interesting because I found out, I must admit that even though it was holiday, I turned on the computer to check the news. So I saw the news about that before I went to the synagogue. I got to the synagogue and I told a good friend of mine, and the 2 of us sat there and cried. And then another person in the synagogue came to ask us what is the matter, and we told her, and she's actually she's on the board, and she went to consult other people on the board, and she interrupted prayers and announced that we will have to do some special prayer because some important event happened in Israel and it will change all our perspective. So our perspective had changed. I joined several protests and prayers. I am in constant, my cousin, the uncle who saved me, his 2 daughters are in Israel. I'm in constant touch and messaging every day. And her life changed. She set up a charity providing supplies to people who are displaced. And so I'm helping her. I've just managed to send her some money, which she received. But on the other hand, we have our country, we have Israel, we can fight for. It's not like being helpless in the Holocaust. We will be strong emotionally, we will be, hopefully God will support us, and hopefully we can do it with as minimum number of innocent civilian harm as possible, but we will have to achieve a peace for our people. The butchering our people is not something that we want or can repeat. So yes, I'm very involved almost every day, every hour. Get up in the middle of night, check what's going on. And I wish I could go back, but even though I'm not serving in the army during the Yom Kippur War, no, it wasn't Yom Kippur, during the 6 Days War, I worked in the blood bank and was working there for weeks, labeling and providing information with blood types for people who had blood drawn and donating blood. I felt that was very meaningful. At least I could contribute. And I would like to go back and contribute, but at least I can do a remote contribution. My cousin there told me, straightforward, that if you can't, you will be underfoot, you can't help. It would be much worse if you came back. Just stay away. But I don't really think that it's acceptable. My people should be able to raise their head, stand proud. I believe that we are giving a lot to the world, and we should be able to live in peace and harmony. And I think that one day we will be able to live in peace and harmony with the peace-loving Palestinians too.
What are your thoughts about the rise in anti-Semitism, especially on college campuses?
I believe that college campuses do not act on their own. There is something behind there. I think that the Hamas is very good at organizing, becoming a victim on one hand, pretending to be a victim, and then using that victimhood to blame Israel for being a victim. They were usually good organizing their PR. In fact, they organized the PR for the 7th of October ahead of time. The world doesn't realize that, but they had the media already waiting to report about what great harm they're going to do to Israel. It was all organized. They used to have no, I don't want to get into that, but my thoughts are that college campuses, if left alone, probably will be peaceful places. But I think that there are some people behind the rising anti-Semitism.
Yesterday, you were at the Rally for Israel in Washington. Can you share with us what that experience was like?
I actually felt that it wasn't strong enough. It was all felt like a big picnic. I think that I would have liked to see more sharing the agony of being first hurt and then blamed for being hurt. And that we should have had, in a way, myself, I feel ever since the 7th of October, part of me is in mourning. When we went to the first prayer for Israel and the kidnapped, I was actually wore a torn pair of pants because I felt like I'm in mourning for everybody. My son criticized me and told me not to do that. But I still felt that yesterday was a little bit, there was a lot of support, but there wasn't enough voices raised. It wasn't loud enough. Okay?
What have we not talked about that you want to add?
Give me a second. I'll look in my book. I'm sorry. Just in case I... No, everybody here is covered. Yes, so I wrote a few notes here about how have to know that we are a very old nation and we are all connected. And as long as we know that we are all connected, I think that we help ourselves and God will help us. As soon as we have divisions, like actually before 7th of October, we had divisions amongst us, then our enemies can strike us. I think that that is what I wanted to talk about. And then I'm happy for doing some showing and telling you about some items that I cherish from whatever survived from my family.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. I have one last question.
Sure.
What message do you have for future viewers of this interview?
That we have to stand up straight and tall, and we have to stand together.
Thank you very much for speaking with us today.
I love speaking to you all. The next generation, Midor Ledor. We're looking at photos of myself, Esther Saxon, as a baby. My mother holding me, the second picture.
Can you tell us when and where the pictures were taken, and can you give me your father's name, please?
My father's name is Halas Shandor, and I assume that it was taken about 1904 when he was a schoolboy, though I don't have the exact date.
And where was that picture taken?
He would have been in Budapest, I don't know. Somewhere or other, I have a copy of his school certificate, but I don't have it with me. I may be able to go and read and identify the school somewhere, but I don't know it that precisely. Right next to
the picture, okay. Yes, and the pictures of you, when and where were those taken?
The pictures of me are as a baby, and because I can't see it from a distance, I can't tell anything more.
Approximately, when were they taken?
I've written it on there, I just can't read it without... Let me put on glasses. I hope this will not mess up everything. It's 3 months old. Oh, this is absolutely newborn, and that one is 3 months old, and I haven't touched it, I was just pointing.
And on the side, what's the other item?
The other item is my father's prayer book that was brought back by my aunt from Dachau. That is a little prayer book in Hungarian, a Jewish prayer book. And it's very precious, and I'll keep trying to look after it.
And that was from the war period?
That was during, yes, before he took it with him to the labor camp, and it was brought back. So it made its way from Hungary with him to Dachau, and it was brought back by my aunt who visited Dachau.
Thank you. What are we looking at now?
Believe it or not, this is my father's talit, or talis as the Ashkenazi Jews call it, that my aunt rescued from Dachau. And my husband uses it sparingly because he doesn't want to wear it out. So he uses it once a year for Yom Kippur. And this is his Yom Kippur prayer shawl, where he feels that he and my father are together.
And can you give us a time frame when this was used by your father?
I imagine that since he wasn't religious before he married, this might have been given to him by my grandparents, because it's customary that it is given, the talits is given as a wedding present. But I don't know for sure. No way to find that. Somebody told me that they will check it out in the Museum of Textiles to see what the style is, but they didn't get back to me.
Can you give us an approximate time frame and a location?
Well, since he was married in May 1943, it must have been made before that. He must have gotten it around the time when he was together with my grandparents. And I don't have any more information.
And what country?
Hungary.
Thank you. Can you please tell us, what are we looking at now?
This was the picture, these were the two pictures my father treasured and was always hiding in the storeroom once a day, and he would cry. It must be tear-soaked. These are the pictures of his two daughters. The older was Veronica, or Vera, and the younger was Mariana. And Veronica would have been about 7 when she was taken to the Holocaust in 1944. And Mariana was 1 year old, not quite 1 year old, but she was born in that year, 1944.
And this was your adoptive father's?
Yes, my adoptive
children?
fathers. And they're so precious to me, because I feel that since he didn't have any biological children surviving of his own, it's my responsibility. In fact, every Jewish holiday, when we say Yahrzeit for family members, I mentioned and pray for their names, because they don't have anybody to remember them except me.
And what was his full name?
His full name?
Your adoptive father.
Yes. In Hungarian it was Mór, or Maurițiu in Romanian, first name, and his Moshe, Hebrew name is Moshe, and the family name was Klein. But later in Hungary he changed his name from Klein to Kadar. And then I was actually called Kadar. I was formally adopted by him, and I was called Kadar as well.
And could you spell that, please?
His birth name, Klein, is Klein, and his
yes, and the other name?
Later name, what he changed to Hungarian name, is Kadar.
And do you have an approximate time when these pictures might have been taken?
Yes, she was there. That picture, the Mariana, the baby, would have been 1943, and Veronica would have been 1937 or 1938.
And in what country were they taken?
They were in Transylvania, but might have been... No, they lived in Oradea, the same place where my mother lived. So that was Hungary at the time.
And what is off to the side?
So the other thing is also a very precious item that I was trusted with. While my father was in the labor camp, he had a small piece of pencil, and he would write down all the names of the people who perished, and he would jot down the names. And before he died, he said he'll give it to me, but he said that he really thought that when he dies, I should just bury it with him, that he had memories of such horrors that one should not just make this pass on to another generation. One should forget the horrors. That's what he wanted. Unfortunately, I was unable to obey him. I shared this tiny little notebook with people through a Hungarian Jewish network to find out whether some other relatives of these people can be found, as they might have wanted to know that. So I made contact with some descendants of survivors of his camp. I was not able to find any relatives, but I did make contact, so yeah.
And do you know the name of the camp?
Yeah, just a moment. I knew it. If I don't remember now, I will be able to email it to you later. Sorry, I'm just too emotional.
That's okay. And can you give us an approximate year?
Yes.
For this notebook?
1944.
Thank you. Can you tell us who these people are?
These are the Roth roots, the Roth family roots. These are great-grandfather, his first name was Herman, family name Roth, with his son, Rabbi Samuel Roth, Rabbi Samuel Roth, and they're sitting together probably in their town called Dunaserdohely, where they lived, and I will give you the spelling later. And
okay.
I don't know when it was taken. No idea.
Thank you. And who are these people?
This is my mother, Olga Roth, and her husband, Halas Sándor, and they were taken separately. They probably were taken in 1942, before they met. But these are good pictures, so I want to show them. And I also wanted to share with you that it was very surprising and amazing that my mother went back to sell her parents' house after the war, and she found these photos. So she was able to recover some of her past.
And where, what town or what country? What can you tell us?
It's something that I skipped, somehow missed telling you. My grandparents moved from Oradea when my mother was expecting me, and they moved to Hajdú Szoboszló, which is a resort town nearer to Budapest. And they were planning that they're going to live in this lovely resort town, and they can have their grandchild come there, and they can come and be nearer. Unfortunately, once after they moved, the Jewish laws never permitted them to come and visit Budapest, or my mother to go there. They didn't live to be near to my mother, but my mother went back to their home there and found photos.
And these pictures were taken in what country?
Most likely Hungary.
Thank you. And please tell us about these photos.
These are my mother's parents. On my right is Roth More, who was a beloved and well-known teacher in the Jewish school in Oradea, Nagyvárad, and my grandmother, loving mother of all those many children. And I just wanted to tell you something interesting about their tradition and how our Jewish traditions go back so many years. There was a naming system on that side of the family that they used Esther and Malka alternately. So whenever, because the Jewish tradition wants you to, if a name survives, then it's your soul survives. So my mother was called Malka, my grandmother was called Esther, her mother was called Malka Amalia, and her mother was also called Esther. Now this unfortunately also means that those people didn't live very long. But in generations, there were names to insert when the grandparents would be still alive. And similarly, there was a naming system in my grandmother's uncle's side of the family, and they were naming the children Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov. They had a smart system of 3-generation names, so that there was by the time somebody passed away, the name would be free to pass on to the next person. So that there was Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, 3 names.
Let me ask you about this, what you just explained. You talk about the patriarchs. What about Esther and Malka? Is it because of what Malka means?
Because of the name meaning Malkat Esther, the Queen of Esther. So that those two words go together. So they used, they had a sense of humor. So they used those 2 words as, and I believe that there was a 3rd name that they used to sort of put in between when needed, but I haven't quite figured out yet.
And do you know when and where these pictures were taken?
I know where. I know that it was in Oradea, both of them. I know that my grandfather was still teaching and not retired, so it would have been, I'd say 1940.
Okay, thank you. What are we looking at now?
Esther, believe it or not, but these are postcards from the family in 1942, 1943, 44, and they survived.
Can you tell us a little bit about who they're from, who they were sent to, where they were written, anything?
On the right hand, it's a postcard from my father's first wife to my father at his camp. Of course, she didn't know whether... Probably he was still alive. Yeah, that's right. He was still alive because he is the one who gave me the postcard. So no, he would have been. Interesting about these postcards is that they all had to be very mundane, not say any secrets, because it was always read by supervisors. So they can only say, we are thinking about you, but not where did you hide the jewelry or anything like that. On the left side, it is a postcard from my grandfather to my mother.
Can you give us their names, please?
On the right side, his wife's name was also Klein, like he, and her first name was Erzsi, or Elizabeth. It's Hungarian for Elizabeth. On the other side, it's the same wrote more that we were talking about to my mother, wrote Olga, by the time she was called Halas, Mrs. Halas.
And these are from what country?
From Hungary to Hungary.
Are these samples of a collection that you have?
I'm glad you asked. Yes, this is a small sample of a huge collection I had. I handed over about 150 cards and letters and photos to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And we cataloged them and curated them a bit. And it was a miracle that my mother had that. Some of them she collected from her parents' house, and some of them she collected from her own place. My father's sister was keeping them. And so it's very interesting to read through and see what their lives was. When my grandmother says, I'm sending some goose liver fat, which I put in jars, so that you will not be hungry. And of course, because you're pregnant, you need to eat well. That was amazing. Unfortunately, at the time it was in the Holocaust Museum here in Washington, D.C., and subsequently they decided that their storage is overflowing, and they moved it about an hour drive away. So I don't think I'll ever be able to go and visit it. But they're happy to bring the letters back anytime. I give them a 10 days notice and they bring them back here to DC, and then I can work on them if I want to. I also photocopied all of them, so I can work on the photocopies.
And I'm sure they're being held in a climate-controlled preservation facility that is taking very good care of them.
Yes, they are held in a good place, well looked after. And here I was left with a few. I requested to keep a few for emotional reasons, and I probably am not keeping them as well climate controlled as they are. So my postcards are slowly fading away. Thanks for bringing up that topic. I have these sleeves that the museum gave me to keep them in. So at least I'm keeping them in the correct sleeves. But I think. Is
there anything more you wanted to say about the postcards?
I'm glad that they were communicating and supporting each other. That's really nice, seeing it from the letters. That sometimes we don't have time to send an SMS to family, and they were daily writing letters to each other. So that's very nice.
Thank you very much. And this now concludes the interview.
Thank you, Esther.